The best late-night conservative talk show in America, Sackheads Radio. And listen, there are no people better on the air to give you the best in conservative talk than Sackhead Shaun and Sackhead Clint. And we're working on the immigration papers for a certain other guy who happens to work here, too. But for those who are tuning in around the world to the best in late-night conservative talk, Sackheads Radio.
Sackheads Radio. Sackheads Radio.
The best late-night conservative talk show in America. In America.
And in this web was a large, I'm pretty sure it was the biggest spider I've ever seen.
And welcome to the Sackheads Radio Show. It is the 21st of September, 2016, the day before fall.
The very first day before fall.
Whoa, are you a little bright there?
Oh, sorry.
No, you were echoey. What happened? We had you all dialed in? There we go. Well, that's also me slamming around the board. How are you, sir?
I'm doing great. It's actually dark outside. It's the best in late night talk radio.
It is.
Sackheads Radio Show. And by God, I actually feel like it's almost sort of late night talk radio because it's dark out.
Well, and that's the hard part about summer. We do this show on the West Coast, obviously. On the East Coast, it's always dark for our show. But on the West Coast, sometimes it's sunny. And it's really hard because I think it affects our show a little bit, right? Because I think when the sun is up, we're a little bit more passive. Because it's kind of like that whole, bad things happen after dark.
I feel like it's really an actual late night talk show now.
Yes, it is.
Because when you think about it from the left coast and the right coast, that's a lot of time, 3 hours.
Yeah, it is.
I mean, we're talking at 11 o'clock, Jimmy Kimmel or Jimmy Fallon's almost on. Almost time. Right now, we got this stupid stuff. I couldn't even tell you what happens on Wednesday night.
I don't know what's on either. Because I'm always here on the Sackheads Radio Show. That's the problem.
And that is where you would rather be, would you not?
Yes.
Oh, except with one glaring exception.
Yeah, I'm getting a little... maybe it's me.
It could be.
I
don't think it is.
Because, I was off a couple weeks ago. You guys did the show. I came back. He did a show or two here and there. And then all of a sudden, Clint just can't seem to make it.
It's nice to have banker's hours.
Right. And here's the best part about this, and you know it as well as I do. He's going to come in here next week, and he will be back next week if I let him in the door. Like his pants are on fire, right? He's going to want to talk the entire 2 hours because he's been off for 2 weeks. Count them.
But will he actually have something to say?
No!
That's the question.
Well,
will he actually have something valid to contribute?
Let me flash forward just a wee bit of what it's going to look like. And if you're listening, go to shrmedia.com. You can click on live chat and get into the chat room. So he's going to come in and then brag about his trip, which I'm not going to out too much of it. I complained a little bit on Facebook and Periscope just a little while ago. But he's going to talk about how great his trip was. And then he's going to be mad about something because it's him.
You're right. I learned that lesson from last time. Excellent insight.
Yeah, he's just going to be mad about something ridiculous. And, we're going to have to talk about a lawyer who we all know is an idiot based on the stories that we've heard.
But he's his friend, so he can't say exactly what he's thinking.
Exactly. And then box wine. So it's going to be one of those, it's going to be an interesting little bit.
But in 2 weeks, he really should have a lot of stories to tell.
Yes, he should. And I'm adjusting the sound. I know it sounds a little hot today. I made some adjustments. We'll be all right. No, I'm looking forward to him coming back. It's been a while. And, it's one of those things when you have a routine with somebody, you get into it.
Oh, sure.
And when it's broken up for too long, it's almost like the couple that breaks up and then starts dating again a couple years later. Like, we know each other, but it's awkward. It's a little awkward the first couple times, right? Am I holding your door again? Am I pulling the chair out for you? Or am I just paying for everything and we're going to go watch a movie? What's going to happen?
Are we talking a little bit of The Odd Couple?
Yeah, oh, very much so.
Okay, who's Tony Randall?
That would be Clint. He is the high-maintenance one. You spent a week in Vegas with us. Who's the high-maintenance one? I love the fact that he's not here to defend himself on all this. That's my favorite part.
My God, that's when you talk about
This is
people.
what you get
You always
for not...
talk about people when they're not here.
This is what you get for not showing up, man.
That's right. When you step out, people are going to talk. It's simple as that. Well, hello to everybody in chat. I see there's the Riva. He is present. UBG, Dave, is present. Mary Brockman.
High Plains, Danny Butcher, which, by the way...
I did not see him. Is he in there?
Oh, he's
there.
in there.
Okay, there he is.
He's in there.
I see him.
And,
Had to look over in the right column.
Agador is 100% correct. You're going to see he's saying Clint is Felix Unger. I agree. I do have, and I always talk about the second best newsman in the business, my friend Dan Butcher, who, by the way... Second best.
All right. Dare I ask the question?
No.
It's being begged.
No. If you have to ask, you'll never understand. That's the problem.
Then I must never understand.
It is he who shall not be spoken.
Get out of my head. I was just get out of my head. I'm telling you right now, get out of there. There's only room enough for one of us in here.
And there's already two in there at least.
At last count, 12.
So Danny Butcher over at High Plains Pundit, where I get a majority of my news from first. That's where I fact check everything. It's a great website. If you don't read High Plains Pundit, if you're in the Texas area, Amarillo Reporter is an outstanding site. And he does something with some little radio thing that he has going on too, but we're teaching him. Anywho, he always sends me interesting articles from around the world prior. And there's a reason for it. There's a reason for it, and it has to do with him being the second best newsman in the business. This coincides. But he actually sent me one tonight that I find very, 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 very interesting. And it hails last week out of Boston, Haverhill, Massachusetts, right up 495 for those in the Northeast. Know it well. I actually dated a girl from Haverhill, as other people like to call it. It's pronounced Haverhill. Many moons ago. Anywho, a gentleman who is a Donald Trump supporter is facing potential criminal and or civil fines and violations or prosecution for having too many Trump and Pence signs on his front lawn.
Oh, well, there's a lot to worry about right there.
Right. Rick Early told the CBS affiliate in Boston, CBSBoston.com, he believes displaying the signs are his First Amendment right, but Haverhill Mass Building Inspector Dick Osborne, the big D, disagreed. Osborne said city codes restrict property owners to 32 square feet of political advertising. Early's massive Trump display is in excess of 300 square feet, and he isn't going to be going anywhere no matter what the city thinks. So
300 square feet.
Right. But
wait. I have to ask this. Did they send some faceless bureaucrat out to measure his signs?
Oh yeah, Dick.
And then multiply them times the number of signs? Oh, I'm sure
they did.
Oh my God, your city tax dollars at work.
How'd it work, right? How'd it work? Well, I'm sure they counted them because all these signs are standard signs now, right? And it's so funny how you never see these stories about Democrats' signs, right? You never see these about Democrat signs. So it's one of two things.
No, that's all. That's fine.
One, it's ignored by a lot of these cities and towns, Massachusetts being a very uber-liberal place. Or two, no Democrats excited enough about the Hill Dog to put up that many signs. Either way, you don't see it about Democrat signs. Here's the problem. It is his property. He's not in an HOA, which I don't agree when HOA pulls that crap, homeowner association.
No, but you have to enter into those things with your eyes wide open.
Right,
because
you have to understand.
That is contractual.
Right, and there is civil.
And people don't realize that's the difference.
I hate it.
Yes.
But I understand it. Now, he is not. It is his own house, his own private property. BZ, you and I have been up around the block a couple times.
At least once.
Mr. Early is expressing his First Amendment right,
Correct.
He's also utilizing his right to choose his leader, which is another major freedom that we have in this country.
Absolutely.
How is it even possible that this law could stand as constitutional? It's a city code violation. I understand cities can do certain things, but I don't understand how they think that, and it's not even, if the city code had to do with like blight, or it had to do with something like that.
Something practical in terms of health, sanitation, hygiene.
I don't agree all the time, but I understand that thought process. But to have a specific city code restricting property owners within the city to 32 square feet of political advertising. First of all, it's not advertising unless he's getting paid by the Trump campaign.
No, it's opinion.
Right. And it's not offensive in the standard of something being offensive to others. Now, if it was like, hey, there's a Trump sign, F Hillary, okay.
Right, exactly.
I'm not saying don't say F Hillary, because I'm the first one to say F Hillary. However, that could be construed as offensive to others who openly see that as they pass in a public place. We can have a conversation. Even if I don't necessarily like it, we can have a conversation. But this is blatant government overreach, in my humble opinion. This is a city code that was passed and has probably never been challenged outside of the little hearing you get at the city clerk's office for this, or wherever they have this, because a lot of these don't even go to courts, especially in Massachusetts, and I know this. A lot of these don't end up in front of a judge. They end up in front of a magistrate, sometimes the clerk of court or a little commission, and they then decide to fine you or not, and it's upheld. It's almost like what the EPA does, right? They don't pass laws for the most part because they are not a legal entity to do so. They cannot make up a law. They're not a law-making body. So what they do is they pass all these little rules and codes. However, they've made it into the law that a violation of those rules and codes can equal criminal offenses, even though those rules and codes are not necessarily violation of a criminal law.
You have to be aware of the law, and I would suggest that everyone that's listening know what your city, county ordinances are. For example, the reason that I'm saying that is, in the county where we live, a violation of a county code, which a county code also includes, say, parking on the grass in a park. Every county code is not an infraction. The county codes do not recognize infractions. That's a misdemeanor. Mm-hmm. Now, the difference between an infraction, a misdemeanor, and a felony is an infraction is something you would acquire if you were to be stopped because you have a broken windshield or because your taillight's out.
Right. Simple,
something like that.
Fine only,
right.
And it's no criminal. Usually, it has to do with something that's not criminally covered to begin with.
Right. So back east, where you're talking about, for example, or anywhere else, you have to know. You have to know something about the law. But you brought up an excellent point, Shaun, and that's this: all of these small, little, teeny boutique codes and sections that are created by local governments. I think you hit the nail on the head when you said, I would wager the reason that many of them are existing is because they have not been challenged.
Well, because they don't end up in a court. And unless you take it from that civil magistrate hearing or that officer that's chosen by that city to hear these offenses, right? You get them a lot with animals, dog tag violations, things like that. It doesn't go to a legitimate judge in Massachusetts. Some cities do, because they, in Massachusetts, underneath certain city codes, they will be amounted to a felony or a misdemeanor, rather, and therefore, if you are charged, arrested, you do go to a criminal court judge.
Right.
Because it is determined to be a misdemeanor, and there's a separate state MGL, general law, that follows under. And then you have the civil city code violations, which are nominal punishment and penalties. They end up being money, which is easier, and those are the ones that usually go in front of these magistrates. And it's easier to grease money out of people that way because the city can then turn around and put a lien on your property. The city can turn around and do all these horrendous things to you for having a sign in your front yard.
That's so odd. That is very odd. Let me give an example to you and everyone here. There's an acquaintance of mine who in March of this year was stopped by a traffic officer in a smaller suburb of Sacramento. Excuse me. And he was stopped because the officer thought that he was going a little bit too fast, and in the process asked for his license, registration, and proof of insurance. Well, he was missing his proof of insurance. So the officer said, all right, in terms of the speeding, I'm not worried about that. You don't have proof of insurance. I'm going to give you this. This is essentially a fix-it ticket. Hands him the ticket and says, now, all you have to do is show this to a peace officer, get it signed off, and then mail in the information. Well, unfortunately, he forgets about that. The truck in which he originally received the citation was sold. Luckily, someone found the citation in a glove compartment, called him up and said, look, I have blah, 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 blah here. What would you like me to do? He went back, he picked it up. That was 6 months later. So he says, okay, I called the number on the back of the ticket because I was afraid that it would go to warrant or had already been a warrant. And, he said, $2,002 later,
Yes.
he got what essentially is a fix-it ticket
For
taken care of, but the fees
Enormous.
were incredible, staggering. And he would have been able to avoid that had he simply, within the 30-day period, taken care of the ticket.
Yep.
And a $2 processing fee.
And that's what a lot of these little governments
And they want
nickel and
hope
dime you.
that you do that.
Right.
It's a moneymaker.
It is a whole moneymaker. And listen, when it comes to vehicles, and we've talked about this before, driving is not a right, it's a privilege, and I understand that. You're playing by their rules totally. When people complain about it, I always say it all the time, it's not a right that you earn. It is a privilege to drive. Whether I agree with every little infraction that's on the books and gets enforced or not, the simple fact of the matter is you are not guaranteed a right to a license and to a vehicle to drive on a public road.
Today.
It will, right. It's getting closer and closer to California. Eventually we're going to be buying people cars because it's their right. But when it comes to private property and your First Amendment, that's a much different picture. It is now a constitutional issue. You could argue that it's a search and seizure Fourth Amendment right issue too, right? Because that's your private property, and unless there's exigency to enter your property, the reason for a city official
There's no damn reason
to be walking onto your property without warrant. And that would have been a question I had. Did you come on my property? Yes. Why? I had to measure the signs. No, you can see it from the street. Did you have a warrant? Did you have my permission? What brought you? Well, because it's a city code violation. No, that doesn't amount to it. Nobody's life's in risk. It is not a criminal violation. If there's a crime being committed on my property, that's different. Police have a right to enter onto the property and so on and so forth. But this is a sign out in front. And more importantly, it's a political sign.
Well, which is entirely different. I mean, really?
Yeah.
Really? We know what the motivation is.
So I almost want to snub my nose a little bit at my good friend Dan Butcher over at High Plains Pundit, because he sent me that article thinking it was snicker, as he likes to do, like the next article I'm going to tell you about. At that point, it becomes a false arrest as the statement out of the chat room, The answer is no, because he's not arrested and he's not criminally charged unless he was held for some reason against his will by this building inspector. And if this building inspector has, in some states, city code enforcement agents do have peace officer powers. There's a whole bunch of things you can get into.
Yes.
It's not false arrest per se. Could be wrongful prosecution if the Supreme Court, if it gets appealed up to the Supreme Court and it gets upheld, or if he takes this and sues them civilly for wrongful prosecution because now he is being formally charged by the city.
If I were to tell you and to tell everyone listening just who under the guise of the 830 sections and the 832 sections of the California Penal Code, who falls under those sections as a peace officer,
The list goes on and on.
it is absolutely astounding. Ladies and gentlemen, did you know that personnel from the dental board of the state of California are peace officers and carry guns?
They're not the only ones.
Can you? Oh, that's one of many.
Oh, yeah.
Can you imagine what their catchphrase might be? You, sir, put down the amalgam.
Yeah. You with the drill. Step away.
Drop it.
But it's every state has them. It's amazing.
It's just ridiculous.
The amount of duality. And I'm not even mad that there's enforcement for that stuff. I am, and that's a whole argument for a different show.
It's just an interesting point. And yes, oh my God, you could create an entirely different show about that. I have just one question for you. The story that you're going to tell us, is it going to send us all 210 over 190? That's all I want to know.
No.
Because I have one after yours that I think will.
Though I was close to that earlier this week. And I think that will dovetail into the next statement. This one's a little bit more lighthearted, and I wanted to start the show in a little bit more of an upbeat tone because the next 2 hours are probably going to be grueling and miserable.
We're going to take you downhill, ladies
and
gentlemen. I'm afraid.
We're going to do the exact opposite of what should happen, which leave you up at about at the end. I kind of want you to leave pissed off tonight. I really think that needs to happen with what's going on in the world. However, the story out of England from the Mirror. Teen sues parents for posting embarrassing and intimate baby photos on Facebook.
I read that.
Oh, my goodness. I'm not even going to go into the ridiculousness of this article.
No, but if you do, when you read that, at first blush, you think, that's just completely over the top.
It is over the top.
Then you read the article and you listen to some of the things that were said on the parents' side, and it just falls into the category of, really, people, are you serious? This is really worth arguing about in these times. You really can't sit down and talk it out and decide that you're going to shake hands and keep on living. Really?
You have, first of all, and I may not have understood this 6 years ago before I have a child. I'll be the first one to admit it. But as a parent, your view with your child changes. You think things that are adorable that aren't, that nobody else thinks is at all interesting or entertaining.
Right.
And I try to remind myself of this on a regular basis. However, if they're putting on pictures of her 14 and in the bath, that's inappropriate. If they're putting pictures of her shirtless at 2 with a diaper on, hugging the family dog, that's a lot different, right? Yes, I understand it's on social media, that person, but I would turn around and argue hey, you know what? At that point, you didn't have the right to say no because you were a juvenile and I was your parent and I'm custodial over you, and this is essentially mine. So, yeah, you could be mad now, but at that point, you were my child. If you're over 18 now, it's a different animal. But at that time, I had custodial control over you. Tough shit.
What I don't recall about the story, and maybe you can elucidate me about that, the child is not a child. The child is at least 18 now.
Over the age of 18 now. It's just ridiculous.
And she or he,
She.
I think it was a she. Okay.
Yeah, she.
And she has asked the parents, all right, you've posted X number of photographs already on social media. Can you stop, please?
So she says.
So she says. And the parents have said apparently no.
Waste of court time. Waste of taxpayer money.
Yeah, just go to,
Ridiculous.
sit down, hammer it out.
And have a day. Talk to your parents. Talk to your folks.
Good Lord.
Agador linked something in the chat room that I'm going to open up right now because we don't talk about deviance, sexual deviance all that often on the show.
I know where you're going.
You're not supposed to laugh yet. I'm trying to set this up to be serious.
Wait. I'm
However,
very serious now.
I want to talk about one of the biggest violators of female rights in the islands of the Galapagos.
I know where you're going. Yes. You are absolutely correct.
And I don't know when this is going to stop, and I don't know when this guy's going to be brought to justice. However, his name is Diego. Diego has fathered over 800 babies over the last couple of years on the island of Espanola in the Galapagos. He has ridiculously... he just won't stop. That's the problem. This guy is a madman. This guy needs to be brought to justice because I'll tell you what the way he treats women, I think, is unholy. I don't...
he casts his seed near and far.
Yes. And it's horrible. And who's going to pay for these 800 babies?
Who is paying for the babies?
By the way, Diego is a tortoise who's over 100 years old. And they're saying this animal single-handedly saved his species from existence.
God bless Diego.
Yeah, God bless Diego.
You go, sir.
According to a tortoise preservation specialist at the Galapagos National Park, his name is Washington Tapia. He is a very sexually active male reproducer. He's contributed enormously to repopulating the island. Diego is some sort of tortoise I can't pronounce, a species of the Galapagos tortoise found in the wild only on Espanola. 50 years before Diego showed up, there was only 12 females, 2 males, and apparently the number's starting to skyrocket, which is just great. Hey, you know what? It's funny to me. But the fact that you look at the way, and I always talk about clickbait on the internet, because the first time I saw that article, it was sex-crazed male has over 800 children.
And you think, I've got to read.
And I'm like, well, I got to read about this scumbag, don't I? Right? So I click on it, and it's a damn tortoise.
What the hell?
So they got me. I'll be the first one to admit the clickbait got me. But hey, you know what? You keep going, Diego. Hold on, buddy. Don't give up yet.
Straight on, mister.
We're up against a break. When we come back, it's going to get serious up in here. So much to talk about this week, from terror to violence to you name it, politics. We're going to cover it all here on the Sackheads Radio Show, live on the SHR Media Network. Back in a few.
Conservative media done right. You're listening to the SHR Media Network.
Breaking news. According to the latest report coming out of SHR Media, a merchandise store to support both the Reaver of Common Sense and SHR Media has just been unleashed to the general public. Be forewarned that this site can be contagious and numerous items can be purchased to support the best news programming. Go to Reaver.one website and click on the store link to check out the merchandise.
Hello, I'm Matt, a student at Hillsdale College. Here's Hillsdale President Larry Arnn on the continuing relevance of the Constitution.
Many argue today that the Constitution is outdated because it addresses problems peculiar to the 18th century. Some parts of the Constitution do read rather quaintly. Consider the injunction against titles of nobility in Article 1, Section 9 of the Constitution. But is that so outdated? The purpose of the injunction is to prevent the government granting special privileges to some for partisan reasons. This strikes at the heart of the rule of law. The crony capitalism so common today is a place where the government bestows favors and tax dollars on some businesses to give them a leg up over others. This is exactly the kind of thing the Constitution was meant to prohibit. The the Constitution is not so outdated after all.
This Constitution Minute was brought to you by Hillsdale College. To join the national conversation on the Constitution, go to constitutionminute.com.
Times are dark. The people misled by corrupt politicians, lied to by establishment media, and deceived by the false messages of Islam. A nation in confusion needs a guide. It needs a man with a cane. I'm Dave Milner. Join me on Spreaker, SHR Media, High Plains Talk Radio, Live Rebooting Liberty, and YouTube for a unique brand of commentary on the unpleasant blind guide. Because truth is not always pleasant.
In a world controlled by corrupt politicians.
You got a business. You didn't build that.
A team of ordinary men emerge from the ashes to give voice to the voiceless and hope to the hopeless. Sackhead Shaun.
Dude, I'm not saying Kath was stupid, bro.
Sackhead Clint.
All good friends of ours usually show up drunk.
Also starring Sacco as the producer.
I'm a little bit drunk, 'cause I'm drinking.
They are the Sackheads Radio Show. Every Wednesday at 8 p.m. Pacific on shrmedia.com.
Beware, the Jersey Takeover is here. Every Monday through Friday, 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. You can catch the Reverb Common Sense Show, hosted by Jersey Joe, right here on shrmedia.com and highplainsdailynews.com. Only Jersey can deliver hell like no one else, so consider this your fair warning.
Conservative media done right. You're listening to the SHR Media Network.
And welcome back to the Sackheads Radio Show live on the SHR Media Network. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you very much to Dan Butcher for starting the day off in Agador with the tortoise story. I was looking for the lighthearted at the beginning of the show before it got heavy, and it was there, and I appreciated that very much.
I have one more quick story about government overreach, which is not particularly lighthearted, but it is, in fact, stupid.
Okay.
This is from theatlantic.com, and the headline is, "The Danger of Being Neighborly Without a Permit." All over America, people have put small give one, take one book exchanges in front of their homes. Then they were told to tear them down. Now, we're not talking about anybody making money or cornering the market on any particular thing. 3 years ago, the Los Angeles Times published a feel-good story on the Little Free Library movement. And the idea is pretty simple. A book lover puts a book or a shelf or a crate of books in the front yards. Neighbors come over, they browse, they take one, they return one later, they put a replacement back in, that kind of thing. A particular individual in Sherman Oaks, California, felt that the little library about the size of a dollhouse turned strangers into friends, and sometimes impersonal neighbors, it kind of turned them into a community. The man knew he was onto something when a 9-year-old boy knocked on his door one morning to say how much he liked the little library. He went on to explain, "I met more neighbors in the first 3 weeks than I had in the previous 30 years. Which is interesting because now there's a city council called the Leawood City Council, said that because it had received a, quote, couple of complaints about a particular individual's little free library, they dubbed that library, are you ready for this? Sitting down, an illegal detached structure, and then told the people that they would face a fine if they did not remove the little free library from their yard by a particular date. The story continues on, but I think you get the gist of it.
Yeah.
That's
ridiculous?
Beyond ridiculous. That's beyond government overreach. If government doesn't have its nose into every aspect of your life, and it's not happy.
And that's the problem right now, right? Government just assumes it's got to be in every little bit. It's just horrible. I mean, listen, I say it all the time. You know, we talk about individual rights and government overreach. And I have people tell me all the time, oh, you must be like an anarchist. You don't believe in any laws. And the government has no... I said, no.
No, that's not it at all. That's not the point.
I believe the way our Constitution was designed, that government is inherently necessary. And I believe the way our Constitution and the founders found us... Oh, wow, look, Ken decided to show up 37 minutes into the show. That's weird. Is that it was minimal government intrusion, and that's the way it should be. However, we do need laws, because laws keep one another... Laws essentially keep the strongest guy on the block from being in charge. You want a nation without laws, you go to Somalia.
Yes, exactly.
You have warlords. It's the strongest person survives. I know in a perfect society that wouldn't happen, but we're not a perfect society.
Or you let Somalia come over here, but that's a story for another day.
Right, that'll bring us to Minnesota here shortly.
Boy, won't it.
So I digress and I move on. So first of all, let's go to North Carolina, because that's right now where a lot of things are going on. There was a shooting earlier today amidst the protests in which an individual was shot by another civilian. He is not dead, as some news agencies has reported, but he is on life support. And also, North Carolina governor is now declaring a state of emergency as we speak, so that means they're going to be calling up the National Guard. And I have a feeling it's going to get more ugly as time progresses. So, unless you've been living under a rock for the last 48 hours, what caused this little spur of protest and rioting? Well, first of all, we go to Tulsa. And we all know this year that this claim by Black Lives Matter that cops are running around randomly just killing black people, that's just out there is ridiculousness. However, you had the shooting incident in Tulsa in which an individual was with a stalled vehicle.
Okay,
video...
are you going to go into that? Because that's the one that I personally need more info about. So if you're going to go into that one right now, great. I'd like to hear about that.
Individual has a stalled car. Police gets there. Something goes haywire at some point. There's a video overhead. And it seems like the female officer fired around and the individual died. He was unarmed. His hands were up. They're now saying he was on PCP. Obviously, other things transpired prior to the video showing up. Some people thought that he was moving back towards his vehicle. However, on the very basic view of it, which is what I and everybody else has right now, there is some reason for question.
I have to admit, I have not seen the video.
There's enough reason to question. I mean, yes, and again, already in the chat room, Ken brings up his hands were not exactly up. And you have to understand, and everyone says, oh, you're going to defend the cops right away. The reality is, we have a society right now where police officers are under attack, just as much as the BLM claims that cops are attacking black people. You've had, in the last week, numerous attacks on police officers. He was high on PCP, or we believe he was because it was found in the vehicle. There is some reason to believe at some point a weapon inside the vehicle was referenced and he was moving back towards that vehicle. However, when the evidence comes out, if this officer was wrong, she should be dealt with appropriately so. Because they are held to a standard. And if the burden of evidence proves that she is in fact wrong, then she should be, whatever is, I don't know Oklahoma law enough to know if there's a murder 3, a murder 4, whatever.
Exactly.
But appropriately so. Unlike what happened in North Carolina, there's absolutely question about this. And I'm okay with that. And this isn't as cut and dry as the shooting in South Carolina last year where the cop shot the guy in the back as he was running away and had no reason to believe that that individual was going to commit another crime or harm another person. Because one of the biggest misnomers, if you're running away, you're no longer a threat. No, if you're running away, you could still be a threat. And if the officer believes that, they can use deadly force to stop you. South Carolina was not like that. The man was unarmed, running away. It was not appropriate, and he's being prosecuted for it. And I'm okay with that.
Yes, and if I'm not mistaken, there were two that were similar. There was that and another whose name escapes me at this point. One was, in fact, convicted of murder already.
Yes. Yep.
And see, justice has played out on that. And with the one that you're mentioning now, justice is in the process of playing out.
Exactly. And for people who don't realize, and Sacramento has its own story, which Nene in the chat just brought up, thank you. People don't realize what is in the mind of the officer when these things happen. Tulsa, if she articulates why she absolutely felt that he was going to be an imminent threat to her or the other officers, and they can find that the evidence to support that, you have a different animal altogether. Somebody does not have to have a weapon in their hand to be a threat. All you have to do is have it readily available. If she cannot see into that vehicle and has not cleared that vehicle to know that there was not a weapon inside, and he's saying, I have a gun, I have a knife, something like that, or referencing it or intimating it, the police do not have to wait until they're taking rounds before they fire back. That is something that needs to be understood in this country. They have the right to self-defense just like you do. You have the right to protect yourself. If you feel that person is going to kill you, even if they're unarmed, if they are 6'7", 300 pounds and an MMA fighter, and you're my size, smaller, and he says, I'm going to kill you and starts coming at you, you can fire a weapon and kill that person because you have reason to believe rationally that you are going to die. He has made his intention clear. He is a physically imposing threat. And you have that right as an individual. Police officers' rights are not different when it comes to protecting their lives or others. So Tulsa is absolutely something that needs to be examined, and they are doing that as we speak. Let's go to North Carolina.
Before we do, just one point. Too many people don't think of the fact that you have to take all of the pieces of evidence that you have into consideration. There is not one single piece of evidence that people will use or can use for prosecution. Mm-hmm. You cannot say specifically by a video or one statement that creates a certain fact pattern without considering what is called the totality of the circumstances.
Yes.
And people think that because there is one narrative, one given initial, what would appear to be a fact or a video or something like that, that is the way that things are going. That cannot be. It never has been and never will be. People are thinking that video is the ultimate panacea. Having cop cams, body cams, is the ultimate panacea and will solve everything. No, it won't be. It is not the panacea.
What did I tell you about $5 words? I know our listeners get it, but I'm sitting right here, and when you use big words like panacea...
But I was looking at you. I was looking you right in the eyes. I was looking you right in the eyes when I said that. But everybody seems to think that body cams are going to be the immediate answer. They are not. That is one bit of evidence that you consider at intake upon whether you're going to consider charges.
Well,
one of many.
And I say this all the time. If you are the individual on the other end of that, or if you're that police officer, let's be realistic. If you're an individual and you're charged with a crime, you expect the totality of evidence to be viewed by the law enforcement and by the court system for your defense. It's no different for a police officer.
No, you should not be any different. Yes, you should be held to high standards, correct, but within the law. You do not lose rights. In truth, you do. You should not theoretically lose rights because you are simply a police officer.
Right.
But you can, and I can tell you about that later if you're interested. But you shouldn't because of your job, your employment.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. And by the way, Tulsa, the guy just did 4 years in the can prior to getting out. So let's move to North Carolina. Police officers are responding to an apartment complex with a warrant in hand, searching for an individual.
Correct.
They have a description. They see a man who matches the description. They attempt to ID him, which they have the lawful right to do. It was not a race thing, per se. All right, you know what? I will say it's a race thing. Because if they're
it's
looking
part of the descriptor
Right.
of a suspect,
if they're looking for a black guy who's 6'3",
you don't draw down on grammar.
right. However, if you see a guy that matches that closely, you have the right to investigate. Things go south, he gets in the car, he gets out of the car, he has a weapon in hand. The family tried to spin this as a book. The gun was recovered at the scene. The individual was shot and killed by a police officer who also was black, who feared for his life after being given several commands to put it down.
Which witnesses said they heard.
Very lawful and clear commands. The man did not do that. He was shot and killed. I don't see an issue with this if the evidence supports this story. There's no reason for anybody to be angry. And
there's more.
There's always more.
There is more.
But to our friends in the BLM movement, and I use that term loosely, I want to ask you a serious question. Is it okay, seeing how when one of these incidents happens, you call for every, fry him up like bacon, every cop's a thug, every cop's this, every cop's that. Haven't the narrative for years been don't treat us all because of one? From the black community especially? Treat us as individuals. Don't just treat us as black, blah, 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 blah. We've heard that time and again, right? Don't profile us. We've heard that from many people. Well, you're doing the same to law enforcement. Because there are some bad individuals, and I will be the first one to admit, as with any career on this planet, you will have people that don't do it the right way. Hell, there are doctors that cut corners and people die all the time. More so than get killed by police officers. The same standard should be there for law enforcement. If there's a single individual bad player, he needs to be dealt with, or she needs to be dealt with. And I am okay with that. I have plenty of friends in the law enforcement community, and all of them say the same thing. We don't want them there either. It makes our job harder. It makes it harder to police when you are out there and you have bad cops. However, the percentage is so small. It's almost minute. Less than almost every other profession out there. For a reason. Most cops are inherently good people. Just like most firefighters are inherently good people. Most EMTs are inherently good people. Most doctors, 50-50 when it comes to prostitutes. But in general...
Bit of equivocation.
But when you turn around and you cast this blanket over everybody in the law enforcement community because of an action of a potentially bad action of one person, the exact same profiling that you rail against is what you are doing. There was a leader, I'm not even going to give this idiot a name, he's an NAACP leader down in North Carolina. And he was using the current, the pursuit of the day before of the terrorist in New York, which we'll get to, as an example. The reason he's alive is because they wanted to question him. I'm paraphrasing, I don't have the exact quote in front of me right now. However, these black men are dead because they're black. Now, let's stop right there for a second. First of all, you're assuming that the people that stopped the terrorist in Linden, New Jersey were actively pursuing him. They weren't the federal agents. You had 2 Linden Street cops. I have so many cops who are angry at these headlines. Investigators catch them, FBI catches, blah, 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 blah.
No, it was the local dudes.
It was the 2 local guys who got a call for a sleeping, a homeless guy in a hallway, and the first officer on scene who got shot in the vest immediately recognized him as the terrorist, and the gunfight started. He fled through his backpack, which contained more explosive material, and another police officer got involved. He got shot, and the bad guy, the terrorist, was shot 3 times. He happened to have lived. But if you think for a second that those 2 cops that were in a gunfight with him were thinking, hey, we need him alive.
That's right.
Questioning.
Right. Let's just wing him.
It doesn't happen in shooting situations.
Does not work that way.
What happens in shooting situations, you ask anyone that's ever been in one or trained for one, you get audio-visual exclusion. You block everything else out, and you start going into muscle memory mode. Your body takes over. Your instincts take over, which is why they train time and time and time and time again. Because when your adrenaline dumps and you have that fight or flight moment where you're either going to go engage or disengage, and you choose to engage, you're running on pure instinct. And that's what they train for. As soon as that first round came at the police officer, he wasn't thinking, hey, this guy needs to be brought to justice so we can investigate him and maybe find more terrorists. He was turning around and saying, I got to stop him before he kills me or somebody else. So this idiot from the NAACP, who knows nothing, apparently, about anything that happened in New Jersey, doesn't realize the situation there. Now, the guy in New Jersey, the terrorist, either was incapacitated enough, lost enough blood, or was smart enough to give up, or stupid enough, depends on how you want to look at it, and ended up in handcuffs. Hopefully getting the worst Obamacare treatment money can buy. But I doubt it. He's probably getting better than what the cops got. Because now he's protected by the state, believe it or not, as stupid as that is. But they weren't trying to save him. They don't care. They're trying to live. By the way, if you watch the video from the street in Linden, New Jersey, I'm going to talk about it the next segment. But you could see as he was firing back at the cop, one of the other cops responded in a vehicle, try to run him over.
Oh, and that's happened before, too.
It happened in Arizona last year or 2 years ago. Try to run him over because he was actively shooting at a police officer. You see him try to cut the angle and run the guy over. You think he was thinking, oh, if I just tap him with the car, he'll stop? No, he was thinking, I'm going to run this bastard over and stop him before he kills somebody else.
Deadly force is deadly force.
Exactly. The same thing happened in Massachusetts with the Boston Marathon bombers. What turned out to be a simple traffic stop by the Watertown Police Department turned into a running gun battle with the 2 brothers. They had no idea. And first of all, you think they weren't trying to kill them because they were lobbing grenades and shooting at them? They're going to tell you, shoot to stop, center mass, etc., etc. But your instinct to preserve your own life and the life of everybody around you is to stop that bastard before he hurts somebody else.
No, I thought cops were taught to wing people.
Yes, wing him. Hit him in the knee. Hit him in the arms.
Hit him in the
blah,
leg.
Blah, 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 blah. And so these misconceptions are what lead to this chaos in North Carolina right now. Flash forward to Charlotte, and I know I'm up against a break. I went too long. We have time. We're talking about this on the other side.
You'll still got another 5 minutes.
So after the Charlotte shooting yesterday, the riots begin. Black Lives Matter. Thousands of people take to the streets. If they showed up at the police station with signs and chants, and that was it, I applaud you.
Yeah, there you go. Message received.
Right. Right. Because that is utilizing, your First Amendment right, but it is also protesting peacefully. That is not what happened. And I love when these incidents happen, you always have people who turn around and say, oh, well, it was hijacked by a couple of bad individuals, which many of us believe come on the payroll of George Soros. However, It doesn't matter. I've said this before, and I will say it again. If I am at a protest for what I believe, if I'm at a Second Amendment protest, pro-Second Amendment, and all of a sudden people in that crowd start destroying things, throwing rocks at police officers, whatever, I will absolutely be the witness to prosecute them.
Hell yes, because
I am an individual. I do not get led by the nose.
And you know what's right and what's wrong.
Exactly. Last night you had massive destruction. A Walmart was looted. 16 police officers injured in the fray. Everything was on fire. Charlotte did a decent job, but certainly wasn't prepared for the amount of people that came out. It was tumultuous. Absolutely tumultuous. However, I do have to say, and we're going to get into Charlotte more as far as the protests on the other side, because it's still going on now.
I have an interesting article at the beginning of
that we want to discuss. I do have to say, what I did see out of Tulsa was much more in line with what people who are upset at government should do.
Yes, more circumspect, and not just instantly, okay, we went from zero to riot.
Yeah, and we saw this. We saw this in South Carolina with the family too. The family came out immediately and said, when the police officer shot the guy in the back, "This isn't. We don't want this to be a public. Don't make this something it's not. Let this deal. Let the law deal with the individual. Let it play out." And South Carolina had no incidents, and the same thing is kind of happening in Tulsa. There are people upset that they've lost a loved one. It doesn't matter to me what he did or didn't do. I understand people grieving the loss of a loved one. And there was a memorial. There was some candles. Some people spoke. That's okay. I understand that. Even if the guy was a complete sleazebag, and I'm not saying he is. He did 4 years in the can, but I'm not saying he is. The family and friends who love him have the right to do that quietly, even if it's not quiet, as long as it's positive. It doesn't have to be quiet. Yeah. As long as it's a positive thing.
No damage, no people hurt.
Right. It's not a protest, it's a memorial. You could demand answers, that's fine too. And that's what they did in Tulsa. They dealt with it in a much more appropriate manner. Charlotte, on the other hand, this goes back to what we see in the NFL. This goes back to what a lot of things are going on in this country. The lack of respect for the rule of law.
Discipline. Authority.
Other people's
responsibility. Accountability.
Individuality. And more importantly, commercials, which is where we're going to right now here on the Sackheads Radio Show. We'll be back right after the break. We'll pick it up. We'll talk about Charlotte is Burning. All that and more right here on the SHR Media Network.
Conservative media done right. You're listening to the SHR Media Network.
Breaking news. According to the latest report coming out of SHR Media, a merchandise store to support both the Reaver of Common Sense and SHR Media has just been unleashed to the general public. Be forewarned that this site can be contagious and numerous items can be purchased to support the best news programming. Go to Reaver.one website and click on the store link to check out the merchandise.
Hello, I'm Matt, a student at Hillsdale College. Here is Hillsdale President Larry Arnn on the continuing relevance of the Constitution.
Many argue today that the Constitution is outdated because it addresses problems peculiar to the 18th century. Some parts of the Constitution do read rather quaintly. Consider the injunction against titles of nobility in Article 1, Section 9 of the Constitution. But is that so outdated? The purpose of the injunction is to prevent the government granting special privileges to some for partisan reasons. This strikes at the heart of the rule of law. The crony capitalism so common today is a place where the government bestows favors and tax dollars on some businesses to give them a leg up over others. This is exactly the kind of thing the Constitution was meant to prohibit. The Constitution is not so outdated after all.
This Constitution Minute was brought to you by Hillsdale College. To join the national conversation on the Constitution, go to constitutionminute.com.
Times are dark. The people misled by corrupt politicians, lied to by establishment media, and deceived by the false messages of Islam. A nation in confusion needs a guide. It needs a man with a cane. I'm Dave Milner. Join me on Spreaker, SHR Media, High Plains Talk Radio, Live Rebooting Liberty, and YouTube for a unique brand of commentary on the unpleasant blind guide. Because truth is not always pleasant.
In a world controlled by corrupt politicians,
You got a business. That you didn't build that.
a team of ordinary men emerge from the ashes to give voice to the voiceless and hope to the hopeless. Sackhead Shaun,
Dude, I'm not saying half of the stupid program.
Sackhead Clint,
All good friends of ours usually show up drunk.
also starring Sacco as the producer.
I'm a little bit drunk, I'm a little bit drunk, 'cause I'm drinking, drinking, drinking.
They are the Sackheads Radio Show. Every Wednesday at 8 p.m. Pacific on shrmedia.com.
Beware, the Jersey Takeover is here. Every Monday through Friday, 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. You can catch the Reverb Common Sense Show, hosted by Jersey Joe, right here on shrmedia.com and highplains.com. Only Jersey can deliver hell like no one else, so consider this your fair warning.
Conservative media done right. You're listening to the SHR Media Network.
And welcome back to the Sackheads Radio Show live on the SHR Media Network. I will get to the terrorism block. I want to talk about Minnesota, and I want to talk about New York, obviously. But North Carolina is kind of the big pressing issue at the moment. And I wanted to give BZ had a great email or a great article.
I wish I sent it to you earlier, and apparently it didn't get to you, and I sent it to you again. I wish you had had the opportunity to read this, but I'd like. I'm going to give some highlights from the article, and then I'm going to give my very opinionated opinion about this, and then I'd like to throw it over to you. And the reason I wish that you'd read it is this. CMPD, this is the article, this is from the Charlotte Observer. So the headline is CMPD said Keith Lamont Scott had a gun. Thank God you're sitting down, because the second sentence in that headline said, was that reason enough to order him to drop it?
Yes. Yes.
All right, well...
As it was pointing at a police officer.
After I saw that article and I took a few emergency respirations... I'd like to read the article for a while and then get some thoughts after I do a bit of spleen venting, shall we say.
My.
Charlotte Mecklenburg police say that Keith Lamont Scott was holding a handgun, not a book, moments before he was shot and killed by an officer Tuesday afternoon. But one expert questions whether CMPD was justified in its initial interaction with Scott, even based on the police's own version of events. Oh, wait. Just you wait. In a statement released Wednesday morning, the city said the officers had come to the village at College Downs apartment complex to serve an outstanding warrant, just like you suggested, Shaun. As they entered the complex, the police noticed Keith Lamont Scott, who was not the person they were trying to serve the warrant on, according to a statement by CMPD Chief Kerr Putney. The officers, quote, observed a subject, Mr. Scott, inside a vehicle in the apartment complex. The subject exited. Listen closely. What was that? The subject exited the vehicle armed with a handgun. Officers observed the subject get back into the vehicle, at which time they began to approach the subject. Now, initial question to the people that are listening at this point. Do you think officers had probable cause to approach that suspect?
Yes.
Now, keep that in your head, because there's more. Putney's statement continued. Officers gave loud and clear verbal commands, corroborated by witnesses, for the subject to drop the weapon. Here we go. Gregory Wallace, a law professor at Campbell University in Raleigh, said the city's statement raises questions as to why police ordered Scott to drop his gun. In North Carolina, you see, the open carry of a handgun is legal. Concealed carry is also legal as long as you have a permit. And that would be true in most every jurisdiction of which I'm aware. That particular law professor, Wallace, said the Fourth Circuit of Appeals ruled in 2013 that somebody carrying a handgun does not give the police the ability to stop and search them or someone with them. Now, he's hanging that on one case.
Exactly.
There's more than one in terms of tort law.
Absolutely is.
The article continues. That case also involves CMPD, but the particular individual that has that, and this is me opining at this point, it was holstered. Mightily different circumstances.
And in his hand, ignoring lawful orders.
Yes.
And
So-
even if it's not lawful, and this is one of the things I always tell people too, let's say, just for the sake of argument, it wasn't lawful. And those officers didn't have that right. The civil suit will be hefty.
Well, yes, because there are two venues in which these things
Right.
can always go.
But you still don't have the right to resist.
The professor continued. He said the mere possession of a handgun does not give the police probable cause or reasonable suspicion to briefly detain you for a stop and frisk. The mere fact that you have a handgun isn't enough. It's legal in North Carolina. I would vehemently disagree with Mr. Wallace because he is considering only one court case, and that court case happens to be very local and very solitary. A woman claiming that she's Scott's daughter said on a live stream video that Scott was unarmed, sitting in his car, reading a book and waiting for the school bus to drop off his son. The police ordered that Scott drop his weapon. Would not be considered a consensual exchange in which the officer asked the suspect why he was carrying a weapon or why he was sitting in the car. However, according to the city, in spite of these verbal commands, Mr. Scott exited the vehicle, still armed with a handgun, as officers continued to tell him to drop the weapon.
Well, and we also get into the point now where your rights go only as far until they infringe upon others. And if that officer perceives, as I talked about in Tulsa, that person is a threat to his well-being, then it changes the circumstances greatly. No different than if it was just me and he gets out of the car with a handgun and walking at me, a private civilian. I have reason to believe that something shitty is about to go down.
The city had an interesting quote on the heels of exactly what you just said there, Shaun. The subject posed an immediate deadly threat to the officers and Officer Brentley Vinson, the chief of police, of which is black. That particular firing officer is black. Not that it makes a shite of difference in reality, but to leftists and social justice warriors,
SJWs love it.
As far as they're concerned, they won't hear about that. As far as they're concerned, anyone that shoots anyone has to be a Caucasoid. In any event, the subject posed an immediate deadly threat to the officers, and Officer Brentley Vinson subsequently fired his weapon, striking the subject. The officers immediately requested medic and began performing CPR. The issue of gun rights and police shootings has been an issue before.
Right.
All right, stop. Now you know what's in the media at this point. Now we know that there have been 2 consecutive nights of riots that have occurred because of this particular incident.
All because of a rush to judgment.
Yes, but let me go one further. Let me give that particular suspect, let me grant a few things to him on the positive side. Let us consider, although police at the end of this article, they say they don't know if he is a permit holder, if he's permitted for CCW, which is carrying a concealed weapon. But let's just say, for the sake of argument, that he is a CCW holder. In every jurisdiction on this planet with which I'm familiar, Before you become a CCW holder, you're backgrounded, and what else happens? You're put through training, and you're given a test, and you're asked if you're familiar
in
with...
in a lot of places.
Yes, and you're asked if you're demanded that you become familiar with the constituent elements of deadly force, and when and how it's lawful that deadly force may be applied.
Yeah.
So let's say, for example, you and everyone listening, let's say you are a CCW permitted holder of a firearm, which carries with it a requisite massive responsibility and, of course, personal accountability as well. Would you, ladies and gentlemen, if you were in this particular situation, and let's assume that he was sitting in an automobile, and let's assume that he's a permit holder, and let's assume that he's carrying a handgun, would you, upon the approach of officers, get out of your vehicle holding and clutching a firearm? Would that be done at all? Anyone that's not a blockhead or a blithering idiot would not put themselves into that situation, because having already taken the test and being given a permit to hold a gun would have known not to do that.
Even if I didn't take all those classes.
So I'm giving him the leeway with... I'm giving him a grand amount of leeway. I'm saying, let's say that these things are, in fact, facts and evidence, though we don't know that yet. No individual in their right mind, upon approach from police, for any reason whatsoever, would come out clutching any kind of a firearm. You are asking to be shot.
Well, it's like everything
Even
else.
off-duty police don't do that.
Mm-hmm.
And, of course, they're law enforcement officers. They don't need a CCW. That's their job. They would not do that upon approach if they're off-duty and in civilian clothing. They would not do that upon approach of uniformed officers.
Well, and you now have a lot of training in a lot of cities for plainclothes police officers in these situations. That changes. Hey, if you're working something, and a buddy of mine went through this, if you guys are working something and you're chasing someone through a backyard and you're in regular clothes and you just have your badge hanging, when a uniformed guy shows up, you drop your weapon and immediately announce yourself.
Yes, you do.
Just for that, for accidental, they call it blue-on-blue shootings. And it's still going to happen, but it doesn't matter. This is.
But here's my point.
The ridiculousness goes so far with this.
Yes, here's my point. We have now gotten to the point in terms of law enforcement that the Charlotte Observer is now kicking out an article with a headline that said, indicating CMPD said Keith Lamont Scott had a gun, and then asking, was that reason enough to order him to drop it?
Right.
Are you kidding me?
But that's the liberal narrative, right? And Agador just brought up a great point in the chat room. He said, I live in Vermont, some of the most lax gun laws in the country, and we have zero incidents of that kind. CCW holders get shot so minimally in this country, it's almost untrackable from law enforcement. It is almost untrackable because they're responsible gun owners.
Let's go one further there, Shaun. You're on a roll. Let's consider this. In Texas, what do we know? We know that Texas recently approved open carry for permit holders with one extremely huge caveat. Only a person attempting to make a very specific issue or someone who is an absolute moron would carry openly. Mm-hmm. Anyone within the sound of my voice, if you have the ability to do a thing, is it always required and requisite that you, in fact, do that thing? And I say, no, it's not, particularly with regard to open carry. And I may be excoriated from one end to the next, but you're a blithering buffoon if you think that it's a good thing to carry openly unless you happen to live on Mars, where you know there are no creatures that can disarm you.
But again, and this is where I'll push back a little bit, you're California born and bred, for the most part, right?
Yes, I am.
So, Texas is a different place. Out here, guns are a big deal. In Texas, for the most part, it's no different than a carpenter walking down the street with a hammer. It's not perceived differently. It's not weird. So for those guys who open carry, A lot of them do it. I've talked to a couple other when I was down there before. A lot of them do it because it's hot and they have a T-shirt on, and they can.
I'll go you one further. There are animals, not human beings, that happen to be vertical bipeds, walking around in New Mexico, Arizona, Texas, and whatnot, who are gang members who, if given the slightest molecule of an opportunity, will take it.
Oh, yeah.
And you would be a fool even in that kind of an environment. And you say that it's sort of a common environment in Texas. Well, I happen to be in California, in occupied California, and there was a time when it was common for people to drive around in pickup trucks and you had a gun rack, and people had rifles and shotguns in the gun racks and pickups. And that disappeared in the 60s. That was predominantly gone in the 70s. But that occurred around here as well. It may be part of the culture, but whether or not it's a part of the culture, no right-thinking individual decides that they're going to particularly push that envelope, because there are people that are looking to take advantage of that situation immediately. Well, if you want to see what's going on with regard to the people in southern, say, New Mexico, Arizona, and in parts of Texas, MS-13, SNM people and gang members, they just as soon disarm you and shoot you in the head.
I understand that, but also you have to understand, too, a lot of people in Texas, go ahead, try it. You know, it's that whole not fear thing. It's just a different culture, and it's not wrong. It's really not. I do want to move a little bit, because Danny Butcher just put something in the chat room that the individual in North Carolina, Keith Lamont Scott, was charged in 2004 with multiple counts, including felony assault with a dangerous weapons. Records show that most of the charges were dismissed. He pled guilty to a single charge of misdemeanor assault with a dangerous weapon. Now, I don't know North Carolina law. I asked him if that was a felony, only because I didn't see the misdemeanor part when I first read it. If North Carolina is a state that if you commit... Well, when I first read it, I breezed through it just because I was looking for the meat of it. It is one of those states where if you commit any sort of battery, you lose the right to carry a weapon. There are states that have that on their books. Any sort of violent crime against somebody else...
Yeah, California for one.
Yeah, it means you can... Other states don't. If it's a misdemeanor, it's a misdemeanor.
Domestic violence in California, you're gone.
Right. And then he has a criminal record out of Texas, South Carolina, and North Carolina. Texas records show he's convicted of evading arrest with a vehicle, and several months later of aggravated assault with a deadly weapon in 92. In South Carolina, Scott pled guilty to contributing to the delinquency of a minor. So without being a lawyer and going too far into those specific states' laws, it appears that he should not have possessed a weapon to begin with, based on what I have read. And if I am wrong, prove it. Shaun.lews@shrmedia.com. So,
well, let's go back to the attorney's mindset, because the attorneys are gauging things in hindsight.
I still have to cover New York, Minnesota.
All right. Moving on.
I know. It's a big deal, but we've had
it's a target-rich environment.
I know. It's just this story.
I have to go before you move on to something else. Dave, what did Dave say? Oh, crap. Dave said, I'd still also like to have a nice Browning High Power book.
Well, if you're not one of those folks who's in chat, you're missing a great conversation that the Exceptional Conservative and Dave started, and I believe Joe played along and some others, about how books are sometimes called guns on the street, and they've just gone on and on from there. Ken just posted North Carolina shall issue state for concealed weapons. The individual must inform law enforcement when addressed he or she is carrying a concealed handgun, and that's under the general statute 14-415.12a, subsection 4. It looks like this guy never should have possessed a weapon whatsoever. And I'm going to move from North Carolina.
Dave, there's your link in chat.
I'm going to move on because I want to talk about the terrorism attacks that happened this week. And I want to go to Minnesota because I think it was Friday night that the attack happened. Oh, Saturday night in Minnesota. It was Saturday night because I was talking to Jersey Joe on the phone. In the midst of the Chelsea bombings, which we will get to, there was an edged weapon attack in a mall in Minnesota.
Yes, 8 persons.
Yes, 8 persons were stabbed, some severely.
Yes.
There's a couple pictures online of a guy who has 5 or 6 nasty slash wounds to his back, like gutted like a fish almost. Individual who, amazingly, ISIS says he's a warrior of ISIS or Islam or however you want to put that, who is also an American citizen, I believe, Somali descent.
Yes.
A college student, and a security guard entered into the mall, into one of the stores, and began hacking and slashing people, asking people, "Are you Muslim?" before the attack, and shouting "Allahu Akbar" during the attack. It was immediate and apparent that this was a terrorist attack. This was an edged weapon attack. Oh, guns, 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 guns. No. Yeah, nobody died. Nobody died. I understand that. But it's another edged weapon attack. And we've talked about this before. You know, we had the incident, I think it was out of Kansas last year or the year before, where the guy went into his former business and beheaded 2 people before the off-duty cop shot him. This incident, again, good guy with a gun, Officer Falconer, who is a police officer in Minnesota.
Correct, Jonah Falconer.
Who is also, appears to be a badass. You want to talk about the right guy? You know, I always say, like, when I go to the doctor, or God forbid I ever end up in the ER for something major, I don't care if the guy's a nice guy. I want him to be the best person at what he does.
Yeah.
And I've had this experience before with doctors where you're like, wow, you have no bedside manner.
Yeah, screw your bedside manner.
But
how
if
you're good
brilliant,
with a needle and thread.
Right. Brilliant is brilliant. This guy was brilliant at the moment, this Officer Falconer. He engaged the suspect and put him down. This 20-year-old, I'm not going to say his name because I'm trying to get away from that. And shot him dead. ISIS, within hours, immediately owned up to it, claimed responsibility. His family was shocked, naturally, because we see that all the time. We were shocked by this. We never saw this coming. I do have to point out, though, the difference between the Muslim leaders in Minnesota and the BLM movement leaders from the AAACP down there in North Carolina. The Muslim leaders in Minnesota at least said, we want answers as to why this happened. They didn't deny it. They didn't try to say he was just turned. And that's the difference. Now, we can argue about, and I know I can already tell you in chat room who's going to go crazy about this story and say what and say how. We have our opinions about Islam and violence and all these other things. I'm just talking about the public response to it. It was grossly underreported in the news because the explosions that night in New York, and it's convenient for the leftist media to ignore it. There are many people who are trying to make this into, oh, he had mental health issues. Yeah.
Oh, don't even get me going on that. We have a local story about that in Sacramento with regard to an officer who shot an individual
who had mental health
with
issues.
Quote, mental health issues.
But the left is trying to push that narrative versus the whole, he was an Islamist extremist who was trying to kill people in the name of Allah. Even if he did have mental illness. This, I always go back to, why is he walking around if he's that much of a threat? If everybody knew he had mental illness, why is this an issue? Clint and I talked a couple years ago about bringing back state hospitals and stuff like that for people with mental illness. Hey, if the difference between you killing somebody and not killing somebody is you, the person with mental illness, remember to take your pill every day, I do not trust you to do that.
No, and the law says people have a right to refuse.
Right. But I digress. I don't care if it was a mental illness. I really don't.
And neither can cops, and people don't consider it. They don't have the luxury of considering the background of an individual at the time they meet.
Yes. And what you have to remember is there were 8 people in Minnesota who were attacked and terrorized. This was a terrorist incident.
Period.
I don't want to hear about lone wolf.
No.
I don't want to hear about any of that. It doesn't matter.
It doesn't
This was
matter.
a terrorist incident. And those who are making excuses for what the motivation was are the issue, in my humble opinion.
When someone says they're doing it in the name of Islam, and when someone says
Orlando.
when someone says Allahu Akbar, that's called a clue.
Orlando.
If there's one thing that Islam is not shy about, is telling you what it wants and how it's going to get there, and we're not listening.
Orlando. I go back to Orlando. As soon as somebody tries to go the whole, we don't know what the motivation was, I go back to Orlando. Yes, we do, he told us. This guy wasn't shy about it. The New York bomber was not shy about it.
No, not at all.
We know what the motivation was.
Their job. They will happily, gladly tell us.
And if he was also mentally ill as well, it's not, I don't care.
That's not an issue.
I don't care. I always bring this up with mental illness. And so every time somebody was like, oh, he was mentally ill. If you're sitting in an airplane at 40,000 feet and somebody who may be mentally ill starts trying to open the door to the fuselage, are you going to let them do it because they're mentally ill or potentially mentally ill?
You're going to say, sir, have you taken your medication?
Right. Do you have a mental illness?
Yes.
Is
Can
that
you
what's
sit
causing
down
you to do this?
And can we discuss this, please?
Is that what your motivation is? Or are you having a bad day? No. You stop this son of a bitch. We can figure that out later.
No, you run him over with a food cart.
But this is once again another issue. We saw this. It's amazing to me how many on the left will turn around and try to defend. And I always say, if you're trying to defend something in ignorance of the facts, it's because your ideology is a certain way, not your interest in justice. If you are ignoring facts in order to defend a certain ideology, that is more important than the facts. And that is what we're seeing in Minnesota. 8 people. Somebody said, well, you know, it wasn't a big terrorist incident. Ask those 8 people if it was a big terrorist incident. All those people that saw it, ask them if it's a big terrorist incident. It's the right of the individual. And if that individual turns around and says, this was terrorist to me, it's a terrorism act. And that is that individual's personal 9/11. I hate to say it. Well, you can't compare this to 9/11. Yeah, I just did.
Yes.
And I'll fucking do it again. I'll do it again. Because to that person at that individual moment, when this scumbag's running at him with a knife, that is their personal 9/11. Their life is about to end. And they absolutely have that right to feel that way. And just like an opportunity for a hero presented itself, and the right man was in the right place at the right time, and Officer Falconer is a hero. There's no doubt about it.
Your daughter or your son was injured, was one of the 8 people injured because of that individual. And let's say they almost died. They were flayed like a fish. Would you have preferred that that individual officer or the police that later responded have stopped and attempted to have a nice conversation with that individual first?
I always listen when I hear about, when we talk about mental illness. Bob Newhart, one of the great comedians, has this whole skit way back in the day about when they were having, Chicago was having all the issues of people jumping during the ad crisis, right? The Edsel account, all that stuff. You had all these ad executives jumping off of buildings in Chicago to the point that the Chicago PD put everyone through the how to deal with the jumper training. And he tells the story about a guy's out on a ledge and the cop shows up and, you know, he slips out of his uniform and puts on a suit jacket and then goes out on the ledge. That's what people expect now. They expect the cop to become a psychologist. It's absolutely insane. He should have died by his actions, and I'm okay with it. I get to take a break.
Dirty Harry School of Jumping Negotiation.
Or the lethal weapon one as well. We're up against the break. We come back, we talk about the terrorism in New York City. And once again, it's on our doorstep, and the ignorance of those on the left is mind-boggling. We'll be back right after this on the Sackheads Radio Show.
Conservative media done right. You're listening to the SHR Media Network.
Breaking news. According to the latest report coming out of SHR Media, a merchandise store to support both the Reaver of Common Sense and SHR Media has just been unleashed to the general public. Be forewarned that this site can be contagious and numerous items can be purchased to support the best news programming. Go to Reaver.one website and click on the store link to check out the merchandise.
Hello, I'm Matt, a student at Hillsdale College. Here is Hillsdale President Larry Arnn on the continuing relevance of the Constitution.
Many argue today that the Constitution is outdated because it addresses problems peculiar to the 18th century. Some parts of the Constitution do read rather quaintly. Consider the injunction against titles of nobility in Article 1, Section 9 of the Constitution. But is that so outdated? The purpose of the injunction is to prevent the government granting special privileges to some for partisan reasons. This strikes at the heart of the rule of law. The crony capitalism so common today is a place where the government bestows favors and tax dollars on some businesses to give them a leg up over others. This is exactly the kind of thing the Constitution was meant to prohibit. The Constitution is not so outdated after all.
This Constitution Minute was brought to you by Hillsdale College. To join the national conversation on the Constitution, go to constitutionminute.com.
Times are dark. The people misled by corrupt politicians, lied to by establishment media, and deceived by the false messages of Islam. A nation in confusion needs a guide. It needs a man with a cane. I'm Dave Milner. Join me on Spreaker, SHR Media, High Plains Talk Radio, Live Rebooting Liberty, and YouTube for a unique brand of commentary on the unpleasant blind guide. Because truth is not always pleasant.
In a world controlled by corrupt politicians,
You got a business. That you didn't build that.
a team of ordinary men emerge from the ashes to give voice to the voiceless and hope to the hopeless. Sackhead Shaun,
Dude, I'm not saying cough was stupid, bro.
Sackhead Clint,
All good friends of ours usually show up drunk.
also starring Sacco as the producer.
I'm a little bit drunk, 'cause I'm drinking.
They are the Sackheads Radio Show. Every Wednesday at 8 p.m. Pacific on shrmedia.com.
Beware, the Jersey Takeover is here. Every Monday through Friday, 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. You can catch the Reaver of Common Sense show, hosted by Jersey Joe, right here on shrmedia.com and highplainsdailynews.com. Only Jersey can deliver hell like no one else, so consider this your fair warning.
Conservative media done right. You're listening to the SHR Media Network.
FNG trying to get in before the
That's
bumper
right.
plays. Welcome back to the
Not
second.
remembering that there's two sequences of static, comma, you bleeding moron.
We'll get you there. It's only been a month. FNG. Oh, so let's move on to New York, shall we, and New Jersey, and the terrorism incidents that happened up there this week. Saturday night, group of people, and you know, one of the things that people aren't talking about is the location as much. They keep saying Chelsea, but they don't talk about that Chelsea has a large gay population.
See, and that's why I think your input as to location is extremely valuable.
Well, our friend at Gateway Pundit, he runs the Gateway Pundit website, we found out just after Orlando is gay, conservative. And he was the first one I saw on social media talking about that, and nobody's talked about it since. Why Chelsea? When we talk about locations for the attack, I understand, tactically speaking, staying away from the more guarded areas, right? You try to get into Penn Station and do that. Times Square, all that. The odds of you being interrupted are go up considerably. So if you're going to do something so heinous, you stay away from those areas. But why Chelsea? The only thing I could think of is because the gay population, there is a higher gay population in Chelsea than a lot of other areas in New York.
And we all know that Islamists love the gays.
Orlando.
Yes, Orlando. That guy had homosexual tendencies, whether he wanted to acknowledge it or not.
He had a lot of things. So you start looking at the location first. And there was two different messages. And by the way, they are starting to fully admit now that the bombings that took place in New Jersey at the Marine Corps Run and this one were connected. Why the Marine Corps Run? Well, that's an obvious one. It's an attack on the military, right? It's an attack on military supporters. If you're a terrorist and you're trying to lessen the supporters of the military, you go after those runs like that because
yes, you want to impact them.
Fortunately, because this guy apparently wasn't great at bomb making and not much happened. There's a potential that it wasn't a full detonation, it sounds like, in that particular, because that was in a plastic trash can, and if it was the same device that was used in the dumpster that was blown apart. By the way, that dumpster, whoever made that dumpster, if I was near that thing when it went off, I'd be saying thank you to the dumpster maker for that. However, New Jersey was in a plastic can. It didn't hurt anyone, fortunately. They also found on the route, I believe it was 4 other unexploded devices.
Yes, and de Blasio said, that's not terror.
Well, that was just in New Jersey. Now, New York, the night of the incident, they said 2. I've talked to people I know that work in the NYPD that said more. But also, I had the same thing out of Boston with the marathon bombers. Everyone said, oh, it's just the 2 devices. I've had other people tell me otherwise that were there, that saw controlled detonations. One exploded, the other one did not. Last check was 29 individuals that were hurt. That number could have gone up. The dumpster was the big difference maker. If it wasn't under that dumpster, people would have died. The video from that particular incident shows what they said is 2 guys drop off the suitcase, and somebody else comes up and deploys the device. Device detonates a short time later. Via a flip phone. Are we going to outlaw flip phones? Cell phones? It was a detonation via a cell phone, much like the Boston Marathon bombers did.
Yes.
Same exact device. Same exact device that they modified during the pursuit in Watertown, the Marathon bombers did, to be ignited on location versus far away. By the way, the Marathon bombers, they believe, were on their way to New York City to deploy the rest of their devices that they had on them the night of the Watertown shooting and do almost exactly what this guy did in New York. Later that night, during the course of the investigation, it brings them to Elizabeth, New Jersey. Guy's going through the trash, thinks he finds a backpack full of goodies, opens it up, and finds more bombs, cell phones and everything. Fortunately, nothing exploded until they were trying to disarm it. The robot tried to disarm.
Yes, and I saw the video of that.
That one did some damage. That would have hurt a lot of people or killed a lot of people. Exploded. 4 other ones were found in the bag as well. So now you have a total, from what we know, of 12 to maybe 14 unexploded or exploding devices, 2 of which were detonated, or 1 of which were detonated in New York, the other one New Jersey, 1 detonated by the bomb squad. And the hunt was on for this guy. Now, I said on Twitter, and I want to talk about something, because everyone just assumed those 5 devices were going to be blown up in that trash can. And I said, nay. I think it was a drop-off and pickup like it was in New York with the 2 guys dropped it off, and then the actual planter or deployment of the device was done by an individual. I think they were dropped off, and the terrorist who was shot by the police department was going to pick them up and deploy them, possibly on the transit system, because he was right next to a train platform.
Well, it's obvious that it's plural.
Yes. And I want everyone to think about that for a second. We, the people of New York and New Jersey, it could have been much worse. I'm not saying they're lucky because they got attacked, and I just don't feel like you're lucky when you get attacked. And I hate the fact that there was this idiot who works for MSNBC that tweeted out, "Oh, they were lucky. We were lucky he didn't have a gun." Well, no, people were attacked.
No.
We weren't lucky. It was a terrorist attack. It was a bombing, and that's the other thing that the media has done with this. They keep calling them devices. They're bombs. They are bombs. And I talked about this a couple years ago on this show. We are going to see more explosive bombs, devices as the professionals would call them, deployed throughout you're going to see car bombs start coming up soon. The only difference, car bombs haven't been as effective here, and we had an attempted one in New York 5 or 6 years ago. Just the guy was an idiot and couldn't put it together. Times Square, he pulled up in a Honda Passport with two propane tanks wired together, and was trying to activate it when the police department contacted him. The only reason why car bombs have not been more utilized here is parking enforcement and control. There's nowhere to park it near a highly populated place. So it's more and more is going to happen because we do not understand the threat in this country. We do not accept it. We do not realize that it is very, very...
I'm sad to say...
In our faces.
I'm sad to say I said it then, directly after 9/11, and I'm afraid I'm going to have to say it once more, and that's this. We do not understand the nature of Islam. And I say this as an individual that has read the Quran and is somewhat familiar with the various shuras within. When we begin to understand and we begin to take them at their word, perhaps we will begin to we may perhaps begin to mitigate some of these circumstances. They mean what they say.
Yes.
And I'm afraid that we're not going to clearly understand until we do, in fact, either see a mushroom cloud over a major American city or we see any number of blocks from a dirty bomb unoccupied for the next 100 years. Mm-hmm. We're not going to get it. Mm-hmm. We don't get it now. We didn't get it in 1993. If that wasn't a clear signal then, I don't know what was. If the coal wasn't a clear signal, I don't know what was. Then nothing if not persistent after 1993, then 2001.
Yeah.
We don't get it.
We just keep thinking that it'll go away.
And they keep telling us
it's going away.
In the clear.
And
what they want to do.
Right. We know what they want to do. We know that people telling us, oh, it's just a couple bad actors. Hey, we know that they're coming over the border. They're coming over our southern border. We know this. It's a fact. It's not a question. It's a fact. Everyone's up in arms over the Skittles comment from Donald Trump Jr. this week. He's got a point. It doesn't matter. It's the government's job to protect people. And if a couple of those Skittles are poisonous, then we have to protect people from it.
Why would you not want to protect the citizens of the United States?
Oh, because you don't appreciate them.
Now,
you don't appreciate our laws.
If you're talking about people from Mexico who are not motivated by an ideology, then that's one particular thing. You might be able to couch your ability to let them in because you're looking for the votes. It's said that Republicans do that because they're looking for assistance with jobs. Well, guess what, ladies and gentlemen? Technology is in the process of eliminating menial labor to the point where unskilled labor will soon become predominantly unnecessary.
Right.
So if you're not going to do it for votes, do you think all the Syrians that are coming in, the refugees, air quotes, because they're all young males of military age, do you think that those people have any kind of a predilection towards voting Democrat? I don't think so. I really don't think they're interested in voting Democrat. And yet, I would suspect that's what a good portion of the Democrats are using as a basis, as a foundation for allowing this to happen. We'll just get more votes that way.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, they think it's self-serving. The reality is they don't think you should exist.
You blithering morons.
Well, and you go to Minnesota, there was a whole, somebody was on the streets of Minnesota, I forget which town, that has a high Muslim population after the attacks the other night, and they were talking about laws in this country. Which law do you think is better, the American way of life or Sharia law? And how many people were saying Sharia law was incredible? I can't believe that in this day and age, with everything that's happened, that people still want to play nicey nice with people who have identified the fact that they want to kill us. That's just the way it is. Iran, people that want to kill us, we're playing nicey nice with. Hell, we're paying the mortgage for them. North Korea, we're not playing nicey nice, but we could be a little bit more strict with that. ISIS, we're more worried about saying sorry to the Syrian government because while we were trying to bomb ISIS, we bombed some Syrian army people. Yeah, I got bad news for you. I don't care.
I got bad news for Islam. I was talking to Jersey Joe yesterday, and I was on his show, and I had to really watch my mouth and my tongue. I have some very serious opinions about it. In my opinion, there really is no such thing as a moderate Muslim. There are Muslims who are not practicing as they should. Those are the persons that are being described or self-described as moderate Muslims. Let me give you an example of moderate Muslims here in America. This article has been out for quite some time. I wrote about it back in June, a few months ago. It's from Robert Spencer, and the headline is 51% of U.S. Muslims want Sharia law. 60% of young Muslims are more loyal to Islam than to the U.S. A considerable portion of U.S. domestic and foreign policy is based on the assumption that Islam in the United States is somehow going to be different, that Muslims here believe differently than those elsewhere and don't accept the doctrines of violence against other people, the subjugation of women, unbelievers, selling people off as chattel, etc.
Yeah.
Who are the slave owners throughout the world? Muslims. Thank you very much.
Who are the only people maintaining slaves right now?
Yes, Muslims. Thank you very much.
And pot growers in Northern California. And people can laugh. Ha, 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 ha. No. That's actually a common thing up here. The pot growers in the northern woods up here in California, it's happened a couple times, and they just had another pot grow recently that was busted with 4 people, they didn't say their nationality, who've been up there for 6 months being held against their will farming. So it's pot growers and Muslims are the only modern-day people who still own slaves.
Think about it logically. Who else are you going to get to grow pot, all right?
Right.
I mean, you got to get your people somewhere. But in terms of Islam, what are those assumptions based upon? They're based upon wishful thinking. And future generations of non-Muslims are going to pay the price for us deciding that we're going to stick our heads in the sand. Here's the deal. I think Ben Carson suggested some kind of a loyalty test for Muslims. It's not predicated upon common sense and logic. There's a guy named Omar Ahmad. He's co-founder of CARE, the Council on American Islamic Relations. It's like the top Muslim group in Washington. And he says, Islam isn't in America to be equal to any other faith, but to become dominant. The Quran should be the highest authority in America, and Islam is the only accepted religion on earth. Okay, what part of that should you not believe of what he said? CAS spokesman Ibrahim Hooper said, I wouldn't want to create the impression that I wouldn't like the government of the United States to be Islamic sometime in the future. What part of that should we think is he's lying about? Imam Siraj Wahhaj, director of the Muslim Alliance here in North America. In time, this so-called democracy will crumble and there will be nothing, and the only thing left that will remain will be Islam. What portion of that sentence should we just discard? Imam Zahid Shakir, co-founder of Zaytuna College in Berkeley, California. If we put a nationwide infrastructure in place and marshaled our resources, we take over this country in a very short time. What a great victory it will be for Islam to have this country in the fold and ranks of the Muslims. Ladies and gentlemen, listen to me when I tell you this. Demography is prophecy. I'll repeat that for those who just tuned in. Demography is prophecy. Let that sink in. My final phrase to you, to everyone, is Islam is as Islam does. It doesn't matter what you tell me that Islam means. I couldn't give a shite less. Islam is as Islam does. I believe them.
And we talk about it all the time. Those who, quote unquote, don't believe, and Agador puts out in the chat room, our friend Cal Fritzy, who's just amazing, calls them Minos, Muslims in name only. And I'll be the first one to tell you, I have a very good friend of mine who is one, and he will tell you they are all knucking futs. And he knows he's the first one to go if they start rising up here, because he's worse than an infidel. He's turned his back to it. And
on the other hand, he'd better not let that get out.
Oh, he's very quiet about it.
Yes.
He's petrified. There's been times that he has told me that he's been petrified at events of other people if they found out or anyone mentioned like things that he does, like eats bacon and goes out and parties and acts like a normal human being, right? And that tells you something. That tells you the threat. And he would know it better than you or I. He grew up in the religion. He knows it very well.
You see, I told Jersey Joe something on yesterday that I thought was, it's pertinent to me. I've had a major radio show announcer tell me when I began to describe and tell him that there was no such thing as a moderate Muslim, that I'm just about a tinfoil hat wearer. And I responded to him and to anybody else, I only say this because I am an educated individual. Have you read the Quran? Do you understand what it says? Do you understand what the caliphate is? Do you understand what the goal of Islam is? Do you know what the meaning of Islam is? Are you familiar with the term taqiyya? Do you know what Ashura is? I have 3 copies of the Quran at home, not because I love Islam, but because I need to understand it.
Well, for the same reason Jefferson had it, right? We talk about this all the time. They tout Jefferson's copies of the Quran is because he was this open-minded individual who was completely accepting of the religion. He kept a copy of the Quran because when Ben Franklin went over to England to meet with the Pasha about attacking our merchant sailors and taking them prisoner, and after talking to the Pasha, Franklin realized that this was something that they didn't understand and brought a copy of the Quran back in order to examine and identify it. And then Jefferson sent the Marines over to Tripoli to beat the shit out of the Tripoli pirates.
Yes, and imagine that. It embedded itself in the Marine song.
For him.
Yes.
But that's why Jefferson kept a copy of the Quran, because it was used to examine the enemy and found to be the marching orders of the enemy. And after talking to the Pasha, who essentially said, hey, this is all mine, and I don't recognize your government or your existence, certainly don't recognize Christianity as being what it is, they went, oh, gotcha. Okay.
Our goal was 10,000. The United States current government federal goal was 10,000 Syrian refugees, again, air quotes, into the United States. Well, they have acquired 11,000 plus individuals in here.
Yep.
What percentile do you think statistically, currently, as far as they can recall, what statistically are those persons who are Christian, would you expect?
Very little.
0.46%.
Well, and I say it all the time.
What percent of Christians are there in Syria? 11%.
And look how they're treated. And if you want to see, and this is something, again, you can call me a tinfoil hat wearer, something I become very concerned about. You see how they treat Christians and other non-believers, in their opinion, over there? You think it's going to be different here if they have the opportunity? They're not coming to live the American dream. They're coming to live the Islamic dream.
Exactly.
And that's very, very different from what we're used to in this country, and we can't comprehend it. It used to be after World War II, a majority of the people that came over to this country and fled to America was for the American dream, for that freedom, that individuality. You had a lot of Germans come over here. You just had a lot of people flood this country. I mean, even before World War II.
Here's an analogy that I like to use, and it goes something like this. If the American Plains Indian had had the Bronze Age and then their Industrial Age before Europe, they would have invented ships, crossed the Atlantic, gone to Europe, and then kicked its ass because they could.
Yes.
So when people say that the American Plains Indian is a loving, in-touch individual, the American Plains Indian was a slaughterer and a conqueror and did what they could when they could to the various tribes. That is the nature of the individual.
Yeah.
And so when, with all of this in mind...
2 minutes left. Less, so we got to go.
In consideration of history, we learn nothing. Historical Alzheimer. We think that other cultures somehow are altruistic and Western culture is damned.
Well, and I this is so just ridiculous.
Okay, I'm shutting up now.
That we're even having this argument anymore in this country, but we still are. And that's what we don't understand. The majority of the ISIS Islamic-style individuals are 1,000 years behind us in their beliefs of how to treat other human beings. It doesn't matter what you want them to believe. You're not going to import them, and all of a sudden they're going to act differently. It is ingrained into them. Whether it is taught or not, it doesn't matter. It's there.
And they will use your technology and your culture
against us.
Against you.
Absolutely. Hey, folks, this has been the Sackheads Radio Show. What a fun show, BZ. Thank you, sir, for
what a lovely and positive show,
this
inspiring. I'm going to leave here happy
right
and in a great mood.
Fastest 2 hours on the radio right here, ladies and gentlemen. Next Wednesday night, same time, 8 on the Pacific, 11 on the East Coast. Make sure you check out all of our great shows here on shrmedia.com. The Unpleasant Blind Guy, the exceptional one himself, Ken McClinton, Jersey Joe, the Reaver of Common Sense, and
High
Southside
Plains
Mutts.
Pundit.
Make sure you check out High Plains Pundit Radio and the network.
Underground Professor.
UGP and all the other great shows here. We will be back next week. Thank you so much for being with us. Have a great rest of your night.
The best late-night conservative talk show in America, Sackheads Radio. And listen, there are no people better on the air to give you the best in conservative talk than Sackhead Shaun and Sackhead Clint. And we're working on the immigration papers for a certain other guy who happens to work here too. For those who are tuning in around the world to the best in late-night conservative talk, Sackheads Radio.
Sack News. Sack News.
Radio.
Sack News. Sack News.
Radio.
Sack. Sack. Sack.
The best late-night conservative talk show in America. In America.
In America.
And in this web was a large, I'm pretty sure it was the biggest spider I've ever seen.